The announcement of the Delhi Declaration has been the highlight of the recently concluded G20 Summit. To talk about that, I have with me the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Mr. Gilbert F. Houngbo. Mr. Houngbo, thank you so much for talking to Times Now. Let me begin by asking you, what for you is the biggest takeaway from this G20 Summit?
Clearly for me, one of the biggest takeaway is the importance that the India presidency of the G20 attached to the scale and the protection and the importance of having a global universal taxonomy and having a mapping of the skill requirement, the skill set available not only at the national, regional, but also international level. Hopefully that leading to a better mobility in terms of the workforce between countries and between regions.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the key highlights of this G20 has been the inclusion of the African Union. Now, this is something that both Prime Minister Modi and India have been pushing for some time and have been, in fact, driving. How do you view this? Because this is a big message of inclusion that has been given.
No, clearly, and I think I'm pretty much sure that Africa and the African Union are quite very grateful, as the President of African Union said it, that the G20 will not be disappointed. I think it's important to include the African Union that representing 54 countries, and we know that the future in terms of youth, population growth, and development opportunities and challenges are quite huge. So to have them around the table can only ensure that we move together when it comes to worldwide challenges.
Right. In fact, Mr. Houngbo, India has been seeking to air the concerns of global south at multiple platforms. We've even seen the expansion of BRICS, which also is something that India has been pushing. How do you see the better representation at BRICS as well?
Well, I think we will have to see. Recently, the BRICS have decided to admit 6 new countries. But I think, in fine, all those platforms will be coordinated, just like we could see that it works pretty much well between the G7 and the G20. And we do have the regional or sub-regional set-up platform like ASEAN or like ECOWAS or SADC, etc. So I believe while one genuinely could have some concern, but I think there will be a good coordinated approach.
Right. Also, the fact that we managed to achieve a consensus, unlike Bali last year, the Delhi Declaration has been seen as a big breakthrough. What do you think has been important in achieving that particular consensus? Because India has been uniquely placed, having a strong relationship with Russia and at the same time having close ties with Europe and, of course, with the United States as well. Do you think that India was uniquely poised to achieve this kind of a consensus, and particularly the role of the Prime Minister?
First of all, I believe it's a way to recognize the success of India diplomacy and the whole G20 setup that the India presidency put together on that. So personally, I think is due to not only your India diplomacy, but the whole India foreign affairs policies trying to be in the as a hub, as you said, between different regions and between different political setup. But it's also a reflection of the fact that all G20 members, nobody really is interested to have protracted geopolitical tension. I'm sure every country wants to have peace. Every country wants to make sure that there is a conflict resolution mechanism. So we can only call for everybody and every member of the G20 to do its utmost to make sure that we could put an end to existing tensions.
Right. Also, the G20 joint declaration talks about financial inclusion. It talks about using digital public infrastructure to do this as well. From ILO's perspective, what are the key areas of concern where you feel more work ought to be done?
Clearly for us is really in terms of the protection of the platform economy workers, since the world is unavoidably moving toward much more use of artificial intelligence and technology and what have you. We do believe that that, in fine, is a positive move, but at the same token, it's important for us to keep in mind that the move toward more technology and AI has to be a human-centered approach, and therefore the protection of the workers and as well as the opportunity given to the workers to reskill and upskill in a very just transition approach. When we talk about just transition, it should not be seen only in the context of climate change. It's also just transition towards a greener economy and toward a digital economy. So that is where we do believe we have to put a lot of emphasis on to ensure that these growing inequalities that we have seen during the COVID, that we can put a stop to it, and therefore that the world can experience better social justice.
Right. Mr. Houngbo, you've also spoken in the past, in December last year, in fact, about how India needs to focus on job-rich growth and equality. Between then and now, have you noticed any change, and how do you look at India's labor and employment prospects?
No, India, the labor market is quite very, very dynamic with the economy moving, a lot of effort that the government has put in place to formalize the informal economy and to encourage the move toward much more artificial intelligence and financial inclusion, making sure that every citizen have access to financial services and what have you. So we are working with the Ministry of Labor in a different and approach, and we are quite very positive. I cannot insist enough that for us we have to continue what I believe the government and the Prime Minister Modi is really pushing for is this human-centric approach to development, and particularly to the labor market. I will be very much concerned if the world continue to register positive economic growth just at the expense of higher unemployment or higher poor quality jobs.
Right. Mr. Houngbo, tell us a bit more about India as a voice for the global south. Now, India has led the vaccine Maitri, which involved the Caribbean, African nations, in fact, receiving large amounts of vaccine at a time when we had seen big global powers, in fact, holding on to big stocks of vaccines rather than sharing them with the rest of the world when they needed them the most during COVID. Now, my question to you is that what is the role of India that you see in terms of not just this humanitarian relief, but also as a responsible nation in the Committee of Nations?
Now, listen, the role that India has been playing in terms of the voice from the South, honestly speaking, I believe is pre-COVID. It's true what you're saying that during COVID and through the vaccine production and dissemination, India played a critical role. But let's remember, even the fight against HIV/AIDS through when it was come to produce the different therapies to help citizens with HIV/AIDS, India played also a very critical role in making sure that not only the cost of those products and those prescriptions can go down and can be made available through WHO and other colleagues from the multilateral to the beneficiaries. So this is on the health side. If you look at that also in agriculture side, India has also playing a critical role in increasing productivity in the agriculture sector and making sure that the green revolution that India has experienced a decade ago can also be disseminated. And that also contributes a lot in addressing the worldwide challenges. On the political front, I can also talk on that. On the democratic, on the good governance, you can also look at that. So for me, the India is a very, very good experience, while India is also facing the population growth. Now is the most populous country on that. So I just want to use this opportunity to express how I feel about the progress that the country is making.
Right. You've also been a visitor to India, sir, in your earlier role as the Prime Minister of Togo in 2010 and 2011. Tell us about the change that you've witnessed and your interactions then and now.
No, listen, every time you come to India, every 3 years, it looks like a different country. But when I compare to my visit as Prime Minister in 2010 and 2011, one, I see an increased participation about the India business community in Africa, which I really welcome. I also noticed an increased presence of India diplomacy through the consulate and the embassies in the continent, as well as sharing of experience in terms of South-South cooperation is something that I've seen quite increasing. Domestically, I have to say that I was personally quite very much impressed by the whole work that the country is doing in terms of water, access to drinkable water and sanitation, not only in the big cities but also all in the rural areas, and the opportunity being given to the youth through the development of technology and so forth. So when I compare in the last 10 years, it's true that a lot is happening, and we hope that we can only continue.
Right. Mr. Houngbo, you were elected last year as the Director General of the ILO's governing body, and you're the 11th DG, and also, in fact, you became the first African to hold the position. Very important from the perspective that these global organizations are seeing more inclusive and better representation as well.
Yeah, it's quite, of course, I'm honored to be the first African being elected as Director General of ILO since its creation in 1919, 103 years ago. But it is also a responsibility for me, which I'm very honored to carry up. I do think it's important that a lot of multilateral institutions, including but not limited to ILO, were created at a time where most of the countries from the global south were still under colonization, were not really independent, and therefore their contribution to the creation of those institutions were at best minimum. So it is important in today's global world, in today's where you have an appetite for all countries, all regions, to contribute as partners, right. As equal partners in driving the force for the future. It's important that we revisit those architectures. That's what we're talking about. It's not just sometimes not just about. We talk, for example, about the financial architecture, financing for development. We need to reshape it, but more than that is also the voice of the South, and concretely the voice of the political voice, for example, of the African through the African Union in the global matters. So this is right. Where, and I'm positive. I think we are in the right directions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gilbert Houngbo, for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.